Hey Comcovers, hope everybody's doing well. So I hope you watched the video on the Arab Spring. And this is an example of the revolution of rising expectations. The idea that things are getting better, but then there's a little setback. And in Tunisia, it was scarcity of food, um, rising food prices. And so that actually initiated what became a domino effect of protests against governments throughout the Middle East. That included, the biggest example of it was Egypt. So we're going to experience some degree of revolution in Iran. We know that one of those was the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and that's going to have a profound effect on Iran. So in the ideas of protests and revolutions, let's talk about cleavages. So, a cross cutting cleavage and a coinciding cleavage are two different things. So, as we all know, cleavages are breaks within society along some sort of political, ethnic, religious, ideological line. It's a break in society. Coinciding cleavages tend to be very polarizing. They tend to create tension, and these are social divisions along the same fault line. So, and these divisions create tension. Cross-cutting cleavages are also social divisions, but they occur along different fault lines, and because of that, there's not a lot of unity, so there's not a lot of tension here. So like groups don't get together and start hating other groups because it's cross-cutting. There is so many layers of divisions in society that it does not necessarily create a lot of tension. And so we do see this in Iran. So, ethnically, let's talk about one of their ethnic cleavages. As we all know, ethnically, most Iranians are Persian and speak Farsi. The other major group in Iran are the Azeris. This is 16% of the population. And they live close to Azerbaijan, which is in the northwestern part of Iran. Like they share a border in the northwestern part of Iran. The northwestern part of Iran, these inhabitants are more secular than their Azari cousins. In other words, I take it back. Azerbaijanians, the Azeris of Azerbaijan, are more secular than their Azeri cousins in Iran. Because Iran is such a theocracy, there has been bred into a lot of the people of Iran very religiousness. Azerbaijan is not nearly um, as as religious. Now they're all Muslim, but they're not as religious as say the Azeri people of Iran. And so there has been some Iranian, uh, some people within the Iranian government who are worried that the Azeris may want to unite um, with Azerbaijan. So this group is a growing concern of the Iranian government. So the Azeris don't speak Farsi. They're ethnically Azeri and they speak Turkic. And they are, much like the Iranian Persians, they are Shia or Shiite. It means the same thing. And I will tell you, their current Ayatollah Khomeini, is also Azeri. So we do see that this is, again, there's so many layers here that it's cross-cutting cleavage. So here is a map of Iran. Remember the cat of Iran with the hunchback and the ears and the face. Azerbaijan is here. This is Turkey, of course. And here we see the Azeri people right here, as opposed to the Farsi people here. So I just found this map, thought it was a pretty good. I don't know if the numbers are right, but this is where we definitely see where these ethnic groups live. So the Azeri, roughly one out of every four Iranians is Azeri. So it is the largest ethnic minority, about 18 million or so Azeris. They often feel they are not treated as second class citizens and are more integrated into Iranian society, Iranian business, Iranian politics. Like I said, the supreme leader is even Azeri. But a common complaint among Azeri is that they're often poked fun at as being uh, kind of low class. They are often, and this is a big uh, tension point. Um, they're often Iranian people often call Azeri people cockroaches, and this cartoon that was published in an Iranian newspaper set off a series of angry letters about the Azeri people. So here um, is a little boy. So the boy tries to address the cockroach. You can see the cockroach sitting at the table using different forms of susk, which is the Persian word for cockroach. So you can see susu, susking, cisco, all of that, trying to address the different versions of cockroach. And the cockroach's answers with namana, which is the Azerbaijani language for what? So this set off a series of violent demonstrations as a result of publication in a state-run newspaper um, of the Azeri people. All right, so they're made fun of, kind of like how people make fun of Southerners for being kind of stupid, you know, backwards and backcountry, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like that. It's not like we actually are discriminated against, but we are poked fun of. So that is ethnic divisions, right? The Persians versus the Azeri. Now let's look at social class. So social class, political ideology, right, are also two groups that seem to coincide here. So hardliner, the ideology of hardliner versus reformer, which is basically where the hardliners believe in a stronger theocratic state, and the reformer believes in more democratic reforms. And these ideologies, they also coincide with social class, interestingly enough. And so, for example, if you're a hardliner, uh, you're conservative, you tend to be more peasant, lower class, lower middle class, and very supportive of the theocracy, the Islamic regime. And the reason is they have benefited from government programs, social programs, um, and a lot of the social services, electricity, paved roads. They support all of this. The reformers tend to be more middle class, more upper middle class, and they tend to be more secular, meaning non-religious. They're often critical of the clergy, um, and since 1979, they have not fared as well economically. Because of the huge amount of government oversight in the economy. So these independent, remember how we talked about the bazaris? These independent small business owners, they tend to be a little more secular and not, wanting to embrace ideas of free market as opposed to the large government control by the Iranian government. And then religion. So 89% of Iranians are Shia Muslim, 10% are Sunni Muslim. So by far, the Shia Muslims are a majority. Although, I'll say this again, Sunnis are a majority around the world. Like 90% of all Muslims are Sunni. But Shia Muslims are heavily concentrated in Iran, right? Iran is Shia. So the Constitution does not mention Sunnis in their legal status, so a lot of questions about what their legal status is, because this is a theocracy, realize. And Shia Islam is their theocratic belief system. 1% are combination of Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, and a group called the Baha'i. It's hard to pronounce. Baha'i. There's an emphasis on the I. Baha'i. And so the Baha'i are considered, they're actually persecuted, and they're considered an unholy offshoot of Islam. And they have been persecuted by the Shia government through executions, imprisonments, torture. their schools are closed down, property confiscated, so it is considered an unholy part of Islam. So, Zoroastrians, we'll talk about them when we go into political culture, but it is an ancient monotheistic religion. So, these are also minorities. So, let's take a look at the breakdown here. As you can see here, this is the ethnic breakdown here. Persians, Azeris, you can kind of see, you know, in terms of it is the largest majority. You may have heard of Kurds. Kurds are often throughout the Middle East, and so they have a Kurdish population as well. Looking at the religions, so as you can see, 98% are Muslim. Of the Muslims, 90% are Shia. Remember, we said about 10% are going to be Sunni. And then over here, the non Muslims, right here. They're Christians, Zoroastrians, Jews, and then the Baha'i right here. So, just so that you can get a visual there of the various religions. All right, so social movements. So these cleavages have created social movements. The one I'm really going to look at is going to be the one we talked about with regard to the coinciding cleavages of hardliner versus reformer, theocracy versus democracy, social class, all of that. That's going to create the big movement in Iran. It's called the Green Movement. So, a little bit of history of political protest. As we all know, the whole government was created based on a protest movement, and it was the 1979 Islamic Revolution. And it created the 1979 Constitution, which did allow for freedom of assembly and expression as long as it doesn't go against Islam. And there's been a history of protests, usually by students. They're usually college age students. We saw the same thing in China, right, with the college age students protesting in Tiananmen Square. All right, so let's get to the Green Movement. So the Green Movement originated in the 2009 re-election campaign of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. So Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was going up against a guy named Mousavi, and Mousavi had a lot of popular support. So much popular support that when Ahmadinejad, who was very unpopular, won the election, his re-election in 2009, a lot of people are like, wait a minute, this has to have been rigged. And it's the largest protest since the 1979 revolution. It's known as the Green Movement. Thousands of Revolutionary Guard, these are the Iranian military, and volunteers, these are the Basij. These were volunteers who worked with the Revolutionary Guards to disperse crowds, opened fire in crowds, violence ensued, death toll was pretty high, although contested. So this 2009 election against Ahmadinejad is going to lead to a protest movement known as the Green Movement. And the Green Movement was named after the Mousavi's campaign color. It was a green color, so it's called the Green Movement. So this was started by Mousavi and supporters of Mousavi. And so the government did crack down on all these protests after the 2009 election. Even the Ayatollah at the time declared that society has been vaccinated of the germ of Mousavi, right? In 2011, so that happened, it was crushed, right? This movement, Green Movement, was crushed. But the movement and Mousavi himself held on, kind of like how you see Navalny in Russia, that he keeps getting arrested and taken down by the Russian government, but he pops back up every once in a while. So we see the same thing with Mousavi. In 2011, he encouraged a march to support the freedom-speaking protesters of Tunisia and Egypt after the Arab Spring. That's the video y'all watched at the beginning. So Mousavi encouraged Iran and the Green Movement to support these democratic reforms that were being protested in Tunisia and Egypt. But then protesters were met with tear gas. Even the Obama administration called on Iran to allow for public expression. So this video isn't going to work either, so I'm going to go ahead and put this video in, and it's like a 2-minute video or 3-minute video about the Green Movement, which is our big protest movement in Iran. Last, that we're going to talk about today, is a more recent movement. I have on here 2017, 2018, but I need to update that because this has gone all the way through 2020. And it seems to be an ongoing Iranian rebellion movement over dissatisfaction with the government. It started around 2017 due to water scarcity problems. Also, women, and y'all remember seeing the Fareed video about how women would wear the headscarf, but they would often put makeup face, and you would see hair. They was kind of lenient. So a lot of these Iranian women are going to want to protest against wearing the compulsory headscarf. There was also, again, high food prices, kind of like we saw in Tunisia in the Arab Spring. So all of this was happening around 2017, 2018. And so Iranians started taking to the streets and protesting against their government. And this is going to be the younger people, the children of maybe those middle to upper class. And the middle to upper class, they have been protesting. They tend to be more secular. They tend to be more free market. They tend to be less government restriction. And so this group keeps kind of rebelling against the more conservative government. And then, you may recall, in 2020, there was another anti government protest movement in Tehran, um, as well as other cities in Iran, after Iranian authorities admitted they had unintentionally, accidentally shot down a Ukrainian international airline, an airplane that was carrying something like 80 Iranians in it. And so there has been ongoing dissatisfaction with that government. So here's another video, ABC News video, about what happened. Now, there's a large chain of events that you may or may not remember. Remember how there was Savalny, who was that Iranian general who was shot by a U.S. drone? And then, of course, Trump and all of the they admitted to taking out this what Trump called a very, very dangerous terrorist. So the Iranians loved this guy, and so this Iranian general, uh, there were protests against the U.S., down with the, death to America, all that kind of stuff. And then, in retaliation, Iran started to attack U.S. bases in the Middle East. Um, and that's how this airline got shot down. This Ukrainian airline got shot down as part of, this retaliation against the U.S. But they didn't realize that this was a civilian Ukrainian airline as opposed to something American. So watch this ABC News video that kind of explains that. It's kind of recent events, and it's stuff that probably is in your consciousness. All right, so I'll attach these other two videos at the end of this presentation, and then tomorrow we'll move on to finishing up this frame. Take care.